Hello and welcome back to biology. Today we want to talk about energy in ecosystems. So we're talking about energy flow from one level to the next. And what that means is really talking about trophic levels and trophic webs, which are better known as food webs. But first, let's review the basic tasks of animals. You need to be able to get food and break it down to be used by your body for whatever you need, right? So that's acquire and utilize food. You need to not get eaten, right? So you have to eat something and not get eaten at the same time. So that's the avoid and evade predators. You need to be able to cope with your environment, respond to your environment, and these are a lot of times going to be stressors. It's too cold, it's too dry, it's too hot, it's too wet, whatever. If you can't do that, then oftentimes you are not fit enough to find a mate and reproduce, which is the ultimate goal of all organisms, to pass their genes on to the next generation. All of these things require energy. Now, on the energy conversation, we need to review the laws of thermodynamics before we move on. And these are the same laws of thermodynamics that you've learned in any other science course that you've taken. And we're going to apply them to biological systems today. But this is an example of the universe is governed by a few simple laws. And the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Okay? So we can account for all of the energy that is passed through the ecosystem, right? And so we can say, okay, if you have this much to start with, this is all you're going to have, yeah? Now, the second law says that everything moves to a lower state, right? So as you go through, you're always going to, quote, lose energy, right? So let's talk about that. What implication or implications does the second law of thermodynamics have for biological systems? With each transformation, less energy is available to do work, so older systems have less energy. A constant supply of energy is necessary for maintenance of biological systems. Energy is unlimited because it's used and reused by living organisms. Systems cannot create energy because it is neither created nor destroyed, or none of these. Well, the age of the system really doesn't matter. I mean, you could have an old system that has no energy transfer, so that doesn't even really make any sense. And then energy is unlimited. Well, it isn't. There's a finite amount in your system, and even if it is used and, quote, reused, you're still going to lose some at every state. That is the second law. Systems can't create energy. That's true, but that's the first law, right? And it's kind of iffy in terms of what it's saying. But, right, number two, a constant supply of energy is necessary. You always have to have. If you're transferring energy and losing it, eventually you would go to a state that there's none. And you can't have a biological system working if you don't have a constant input. And our constant input ultimately is from the sun, because the sun, right, provides that energy that is stored by plants, okay, that's converted, and then something eats plants, and something eats that, and something eats that, and we eat any of those things. So number two. All right, so let's talk about consumed energy, okay? It's not just about how much energy is coming into the system, it's about what's happening to it as it's passing through. And so the first thing that we want to talk about is there is a loss of energy for getting your food, right? And so there's a whole amount that occurs. So like, let's say that you eat a piece of broccoli, right? Ooh, or better yet, you eat some rabbit, and that rabbit ate some leaf, right? There was a certain amount of energy in that leaf, but you're not going to get anywhere close to what was actually available, because the rabbit had to acquire and handle the food. You have to acquire and handle the food. So the costs of acquisition are getting to it and actually getting it, right? So location and having to pursue it. Now, in some cases, it's not going to be about pursuing it, right? You don't always have to chase something. I mean, obviously, you're not going to chase a tree, for instance. But there is the handling costs, right? What if it's a nut? You're going to have to open it. What if it's grass? You're going to have to chew that a lot because the cellulose in it is very hard to digest and has to be chewed a lot, right? If it's an animal, you're probably going to have to subdue it, right? And so that probably goes with pursuit. So there's a lot that has to be done. And so this is very expensive, getting the food. So the food has to be worth it, right? And so that goes to prey choice. The foraging decisions, right? What organisms choose to eat is going to be based on its nutrient and energy content, right? how difficult it is to handle, and really how toxic it is. Because you obviously would not want to eat something that is going to kill you, but by the same token, you can eat things that have toxins, but those toxins have to be neutralized. Some animals are capable of doing that, but it's expensive, okay? So you're really not going to want to have poor quality foods, because those would be things that would have more handling time, take more time to digest, and so when you start talking about that, that ends up reducing the amount of energy overall. And so we can kind of break our foragers down, and not kind of, we do, break our foragers down into two groups. We've got the searchers, those that spend more time finding prey than overcoming them, right? Those are going to be generalists. These are animals that eat everything. Coyotes are a really good example. Raccoons are a really good example. We are a really good example of generalists. Now, handlers, these are the ones that actually spend time overcoming the prey. So maybe you are chewing it a lot, you are subduing it, you are opening nuts or whatever. These guys will be specialists, because typically if you have a harder to access prey, then you are going to need to have specific adaptations, and that will limit what you can do. And so wolves, lions, pandas, hummingbirds, right? These are all going to be specialists. Okay, now at any given level, only 5 to 20% of the energy is going to be transferred from one organism to the next, okay? And how much energy is going to be based on net primary production, which we've already talked about. That is the plants, basically. That is going to be the base of the food chain, okay? And then there's a certain amount of efficiency that transfers across, right? And so plants are going to be using a lot of the energy that they take in to just be plants, right? And then herbivores and carnivores are going to spend more energy, right, on maintenance than plants do. And they're constantly going to have to be catching and handling and all this good stuff. And so production at each level is only between 5 to 20%. And it averages out, when you start looking at lots of different levels, about 10%. And so from one level to the next, you get about 10%. So here's your next question. A student observes a small pond community and notices that many geese are hatched there each spring. The baby geese feed on the grass surrounding the pond. The snapping turtles in the pond feed on the baby geese. Which of the pyramid of energy correctly illustrates these relationships? So what you're doing in this case is you are looking at what is the base of this food chain and who is at the top. Well, we can probably rule out these two right here, because grass would definitely not be on the top, because grass is eating nothing, actually. And then in this case, you still have the same problem. Grass does not eat geese, yeah? So we need a pyramid that has grass at the bottom, okay? Who's eating the grass? Geese. Who's eating the geese? Snapping turtles, right? And so this right here, grass, geese, snapping turtles, is the answer. Okay, and so when we start applying that, we can start looking at this in terms of what are the animals' roles. And so here is an ecological pyramid, right? And so at the base you've got your plants, then you have your things that eat plants, those are the herbivores, then you have your first carnivores, then you have your second carnivores, and then you can have tertiary carnivores. You can't go any higher than 5 levels, okay? But so you have your tertiary carnivores. These are going to be your apex predators. Sometimes the second carnivore is the apex predator. It depends. We'll talk more about apex predators a little bit in a little bit. Okay, so let's look at this. How would this food web be affected if plants were eliminated? The food web would collapse. Nothing. Herbivores would change trophic level. Herbivores would become carnivores. Well, I'm going to start at the bottom with this one. Herbivores, not going to become carnivores unless they have an adaptation to do so, and none of these guys do, right? And so that is not going to happen. The herbivores are not going to change trophic levels because there's nothing for them to eat, right? So they're not going to be on any trophic level. They're going to starve, yeah? And if the herbivores starve, then the carnivores will starve, right? And so ultimately, if you remove the plants, the food web will collapse. They are the keystone of the food web, yeah? Now, there are other keystone species. We're not really going to talk about that, but plants are the base. You have to have them, okay? And here's an energy pyramid that just shows you the combination of those two things. You're going to have lots of plants, right? And they're going to have a certain amount of energy. 10% of that energy is going to be available to the next level, so there will be fewer of the next level. 10% of that level, so there's going to be even fewer on the third trophic level. And then by the time you get to the fourth trophic level, or the fifth trophic level, you're going to have even fewer of those individuals. And that's why there is so much more grass than there are lions, right? Okay, so here's your next question. Energy pyramids show the most available energy at the base and the least amount of energy at the top. What accounts for the difference in the energy levels in these two parts of the pyramid? Energy is continually recycled in the biosphere. Some of the energy is destroyed. With each succeeding level, most of the energy is used by the organisms for life processes, and some of the energy is lost to heat, or the energy is used by decomposers. Well, none of the energy is destroyed, and it is, quote, recycled, but it's not available. I mean, none of it's destroyed, but it's not always available. And so 3, right, the idea that it's going to be used for maintenance and lost to heat, right, that's the answer. So that is why you have that difference. So this is just a review question. All right, so who is on our food pyramid? Who's in our food webs? Well, we already know that there are autotrophs, and the autotrophs were the plants. We've already talked about them. We've talked a little bit about heterotrophs, but I want to just put them in their categories for you. So, and you probably already know these, but we're just going to review them. Herbivores only eat plants. Cows, elephants, giraffes, really good example of those. Now, the thing that you might not be aware of is that teeth have to be adapted to the food source. And so herbivores typically have very flat, wide, grinding teeth, okay? And so you've got this like mushing surface, if you will, yeah? And this, I just love this skull. You are looking at an herbivore. This is probably the origin of the Cyclops myth, by the way, but this is an elephant, right? Its eyes are actually down here, and it has a hole in its skull up here. And then the trunk extends off this. But look at those beautiful herbivorous teeth right there. Okay, moving on to carnivores. These guys only eat meat, right? So imagine what you think their teeth are going to look like. They're not going to be wanting to grind the food like you do with cellulose. You're going to want to rip and tear the food, okay? And so you have pointy tearing teeth, yeah? And so this is where the canine comes from. So look at that. That's a whole mouthful of like rippy teeth, yeah? And here's kitty cat, right? You can see that. Now, omnivores eat both plants and animals. And so in this case, right, bears and humans are really good examples. We're going to need teeth that do both, right? And so if you think about your own teeth, and at this point, think about your own teeth, we have cutting and tearing teeth in the front, and then we have grinding teeth in the back, just like bears, right? Bears have that too. Bears have a little bit bigger on the cutting and tearing, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, so omnivorous teeth are a combination. Here are some skulls that I just put in for you so you can do some comparisons, okay? So you have an omnivore here. Ooh, that's crazy. This one has no teeth. This is an anteater. Sometimes you don't need teeth. Sometimes you just need a tongue that you can stick into something like an ant pile. This is a porpoise. Now, the porpoise is interesting because its teeth are super specialized. They're all little pointy pegs, very much like reptile teeth. But this is so they can catch fish, yeah? Now, and they are carnivores, yeah? Now, coyote, that's just like a dog teeth. Beavers, they are going to be carnivores, grinding, but then they're also cutting. So you need the cutting teeth, then you need the grinding teeth. Here's a fruit bat, okay, the cutting teeth, the grinding teeth, and then the cutting teeth and the grinding teeth of the deer. Okay, now the last thing that we want to talk about, and we've talked about this a little bit with the decomposition, are the scavengers and the detrivores, okay? They feed on tissues of dead organisms, and so you've got vultures, crows, shrimp. They're a really good example of these. And then you have decomposers. Scavengers / detrivores and decomposers. Oh, a lot of bugs, beetles, right? Flies, those guys are going to be detrivores. Decomposers are different because decomposers are going to be your bacteria and your fungi, and they will break down the materials, these organic materials, into inorganic nutrients, inorganic materials. That is not what detrivores / scavengers are doing. So decomposers are unique in that way. Okay, and when we start adding them into the energy flow, you can see that you have this pyramid, but then all of that energy that was not available for these herbivores is going to be available for the decomposers, right? So the remainder, because they're going to break all that down. Okay, so in the diagram below, which organism is classified as both a primary and a secondary consumer? Well, the mouse eats corn, so that is going to be just the herbivore, the primary consumer. The snake only eats the mice, so that is going to be your secondary consumer, right? And then the hawk eats the snake, the mouse, and the raccoon, but that still only makes it the, well, here, right, actually in all of them, it's going to be the tertiary consumer, right? And then the raccoon, though, eats corn, and the mouse who ate corn, so it is the raccoon that is the primary here for the corn route, and the secondary here for the mouse route. Okay, and then really there are two parallel food webs, and I just want to remind you of this. There's the herbivore-based, right? These are going to be the plant-based food webs, and then they're the detritus-based, and this is going to be all of the dead plants and animals, the remains, the waste products, all of that. So two food webs are running simultaneously. And then this is just a lovely picture of your own tall grass prairie ecosystem with all of the, well, not all, but many of the very, very important species that you would find in our ecosystem. It's kind of like a little portrait of a food web. All right, that is it for our energy conversation, and I will see you next time. If you have any questions, please ask in class, and thanks for listening.